This is Pastor Stuart Waterhouse with 10 minutes after midnight, surviving the religious post-apocalypse. You will need to defend your sheep. I have sheep, I'm a sheep herder, and I have goats too, from the wolves, wild marauding dogs, whatever they be, even a cougar or a bear, depending where you live. And so today, we're going to talk about the ultimate survival air gun. And this is just one example of what I would call a very, very fine air gun, and it's been heavily modified, heavily tuned, and we're going to get into how to tune them, how to modify them. This would be a standard pellet. It's what I recommend for the 30 caliber. Then I would recommend that you just sight it in for a beginner at 100 feet, and whatever 100 feet is, that's what it is. You're good from 100 feet closer. With the gun I'm going to show you, we're good out to 150 feet. Actually, we're good to much farther if we use sub-reticles, but I'm just talking for rapid shooting. You know, we just with the middle crosshair without any adjustment of the turrets or anything. 66 grain. This is a slug. You could get different brands, different pellet weight. You know, each brand is going to have harder lead or softer lead, different shape of the pellet, and it all performs differently. So you want to pick one and then stick with it and don't ever change, okay? I picked the dome pellet because it has the best penetration and the best accuracy. I'm more worried about wolves, right? And maybe an occasional mountain lion. So I want maximum penetration. People have killed bears with air guns. And so what you're going to want to do with your gun is to shoot several different weights and several different brands at your target, and then look and see what gave you the best grouping, okay? That would be the pellet your gun likes. So find the pellet that works best and then stick with it, okay? This gun I'm showing you is about 930 feet per second. So that's the good tuning I like. You know, anywhere in the 900 is great, yeah? And that is shooting a heavier pellet at 50 grains, not the 44 grains. This gun works great with the 44 grain and would shoot closer to 1,000 feet per second. But I noticed downrange it retained a little bit better energy shooting the 50 grain. So, and the accuracy in my test were the same. So I'm going with the 50 grain. There's a skirt to the pellet, okay? So it only touches the barrel at the top and at the bottom of the skirt. So there's not much contact to add friction going out the barrel. The air pressure will expand the base of the skirt because it's hollow in the base and can expand. That will seal it against the barrel so you don't waste blow-by. So you want a good soft lead that can seal on the barrel. See, what's nice about pellets, unlike a powder cartridge or a slug, is that skirt. And that skirt self-stabilizes the pellet in flight. In fact, it helps it buck the wind. However, that's using up energy as it flies through the air because the wind is hitting that skirt, unlike a slug. The slug, once it's out, doesn't use as much energy. So since it's using up energy, a pellet is good for short range, and it won't fly on forever. It will go on down much quicker because it will lose energy much quicker and hit the ground and be over with. So I like that pellet. You're not going to hit an unintended target a mile away. I use an app in my phone called Strelok Pro to do all my calculations. But of course you have to feed all the information into your app in the beginning. And if you want Strelok Pro, it's the very best one out there, but it's not available in the US market. So you're going to have to use a VPN and download it from an app store in a non-US market. Because it was written by a Russian, so there's sanctions against Russia, right? But it's absolutely the best. You're going to have to put in the distance of the center of your optic to the center of the barrel, right? And you would do that using a little ruler like this, okay? And so basically you go from the center to the center, And since I use the Leopold, it's a rangefinder. Leopold is a name brand, so it's fine. I like this one because it breaks down the yardage into, you know, into half yards, yeah? So you can refine your distance a little better, which is more important for like a pellet gun where we're talking about closer ranges. And the other thing this does is it will calculate for you your angle, whether you're shooting down or shooting up. And you're gonna need to know your velocity, okay? Very important. This cost about $100. It's a chronograph. And basically it has a solar cell here and a solar cell here. So when the bullet passes over it, it catches the shadow, can compare it, and it can give your velocity. And then it's on the readout here. I can turn it on and have to enter the velocity into your app. Shoot your whole magazine through the chronograph and write down the velocity. You're going to find something surprising. More air pressure doesn't necessarily give you more velocity because it depends on the tuning, right? Because what happens is the hammer hits the valve, causing the valve to open up, okay? And when the valve opens up, air is released from the tank back behind the pellet, drives the pellet out the barrel, yeah? And so if the hammer is got a strong spring, knocks the valve farther open, and it takes longer for the air pressure closes the valve again. To close, more air passes past the valve and through the barrel. A weaker spring, the hammer won't knock it as hard. The valve doesn't open as far, less air goes through, right? Then your gun is supposed to be tuned so that it's just starting down the other side of the power curve, okay? So basically you might be getting 900 feet per second, and the next shot might be 910 feet per second, and the next shot 920, and then 930 is the peak on this gun. Then it goes back to 920, 910, and 900, okay? And by the time you've done 8 shots, you're down around 870, somewhere in there. We talked about that power curve. You know what it will be because you used the chronograph, yeah? So to tune your power curve now, a bolt action is capable of firing on low power. I mean, you can be in that light green and it will still operate, which is great because you might only be killing a rattlesnake, yeah? And you're already out of air, and then that rattlesnake comes, so you can still take him out. But you can get much higher power too and utilize it, because you could fill this thing, overfill the air, getting more pressure into the yellow, yeah? The tank is good all the way to 4,500 psi, which would be the top of the yellow. Because I do want to be able to take down a large pig, for example, that may be attacking the goats, as I told in a previous story. And that gun was this gun in semi-automatic, okay? And that's the next thing to consider. Your power curve has to function at semi-automatic. So the semi-automatic only accepts a narrow range of air pressure, or if it's too low air pressure, there's not enough pressure to cycle it, okay? If it's too high a air pressure, too much power, then it might, and you tune it for that extra power, it might cycle too fast and not get to pellet chambered, and you got a blank. Or if you oil the gun, don't oil them, at least don't oil the mechanism for the cycling. You can oil other parts, because when you oil it, which I made the mistake and learned, it cycled too fast, and then the semi wasn't reliable again because I started chambering blanks. And it happened to me on 2 different guns, 2 different brands, both semi-automatic, right? Because I had oiled them. And to me, you got to have reliability. Now, if you're just shooting tin cans or shooting rats, the semi-auto's fun, okay? And it doesn't take any extra air to run a semi-auto, because what happens is, as the pellet's driven out the barrel, the excess air is caught in the front and pushed back in on a plunger. The plunger drives a rod that operates the action, right? I'm a semi-automatic fan. I always have been in a powder gun, but in the air guns, I found out they're only 95% reliable. Well, my chance is that 1 or 2% is going to be the emergency I need it because the bear is charging me. So I want to be absolutely 100% sure it's going to work. So I don't want a semi. Now, if you bought this gun in semi, because they sell it in semi, and then later they came out with a version because people were doing what I'm going to tell you how to do to convert your semi to a bolt action, you can buy it now in bolt action too, okay? It's very easy, however, to convert. Very easy. All you do is unscrew the shroud. But you see, it doesn't take any tools. I can do it by hand. And that's the barrel inside the shroud. The shroud helps make it quieter, covering the barrel, right? And in the front is the plunger. This plunger pushes back against the rod. The rod is threaded at both ends. It's just threaded to the plunger, pushes back into the action, and the rod pushes the action back, okay? All you do is unscrew the rod and remove it. Screw your shroud back on. And you've disabled the semi-automatic and you have a bolt action. That's simple. Now, there's one more thing I do recommend you do on the bolt action, okay? As you can see, when it's all the way forward, the bolt goes down and locks in place so that it's locked. That way, the back pressure can't open your chamber, okay? It's locked. On the semi, you don't want that because you wouldn't want it locked. So the semi has a little Allen key in there that prevents the bolt from dropping down. And that way, when it works, the semi just goes back and forth, okay? But if you want a more superior bolt action, you just take the Allen wrench, go in there, and loosen the Allen screw until the bolt can go this way. Bring the bolt down, retighten the Allen, and now you have an actual bolt action. Now here's the thing. We're talking about modifications now, okay? So the nice thing about a semi is that as quick as you pull the trigger. But with a bolt, you got to take your hand off the trigger and operate the bolt, right? That slows you down. So then after I converted it to bolt action, because this was originally a semi design, I bought from the internet a 3D printed little slide that goes over the air tank, and I converted it to a pump action. See how it works? See? So the slide has these 3 screws to a little metal rod that has this thing here that goes over the bolt. And then when you pump it, it works. Now, boom, 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 right? Just as quick as a semi-auto almost. So that's how you want to modify the gun. Now once you've disabled the semi and you've made a bolt, and from the bolt, if you wanted to make it a pump, then the next thing you can do is you can tune your power curve. But for most guns, basically you poke a screwdriver through the back or an Allen key, depending what type of stuff is in there. Usually an Allen key or a hex key, and it compresses the spring that drives the hammer. Okay, so you can make the spring weaker or stronger by how much you compress it. This one don't have that because it's an inexpensive gun, but it's highly good, accurate gun. So, and it's a very powerful one. But if I want to increase the power, since I can't adjust it, we can cheat, okay? You open it up to where you get access to the spring. Just put a little washer behind the spring. That's the same as having turned in an adjustment, right? And that washer will compress the spring and make that spring stronger. Normally for a semi, you're shooting at max 3,600 PSI. And for some brands, 3,000 PSI. But now I'm saying by going to 4,500, you get a lot of power. Okay, now this particular one, I'm shooting to 50 grain at 930 feet per second without doing this extra tuning. I'm only filling it because I get tired of pumping it, yeah. So I'm only filling it to the top of the green. So now, firing it into yellow, you're going to have a whole lot less power unless you retune it, because the air pressure holds the valve closed, right? And your spring isn't hitting it enough to open up enough. So your power curve, you might all the way up, and you might be firing at 700 feet per second. You've got to get all the way back down into the green before you back over 900 feet, yeah? So you need to retune it in order to take advantage of that higher pressure. You do that by putting a washer behind the spring. But putting a washer allows you to use that. And now, you know, you could actually make the gun fire about 1,800 feet per second if you wanted to. What you could do is get a heavier pellet like the 66 grain I showed you, because you got the power now to fire the heavier pellet. But you can experiment that way. I didn't want to go over the speed of sound because I'm already sufficient enough to take down a large dog. Why do I need to go more? Yeah. So I just left it at that. Then the other thing, of course, you can do to modify it is put on a silencer. Just screws onto the front. You know, so we talk about tuning modifications, silencer modifications. Now another modification, of course, is, as you can see, if we unscrew the flash suppressor and my stock is folding, you know, then the gun becomes very short, yeah? And we'll pack in a backpack easy enough, yeah? There we go. And then, of course, I put my own custom stock on it because it's highly adjustable. You know, you push the button here, and as you can see, push the button, you can make the stock go closer or farther for people with long arms or short arms. You can turn the little knob here, raising your cheek piece for the cheek weld. You know, all of that stuff. And this is also adjustable this way so that it can fit my shoulder, whether it got to be this way or whatever, so my rifle's not canted, right? And it fits my shoulder naturally without canting. I mean, in the old days, they wouldn't stocks. You'd go to a professional gunsmith, would take the stock off the gun, and they would steam the stock to make the wood slightly more pliable and then bend the stock. And then as the stock dried out, it held that bend, right? And that's how you custom fit a gun to you. Well, nowadays, you just turn the screw, which is right here, and the stock can adjust itself, right? So it makes it more simple, yeah? And then, of course, the optics I put on this gun. This is by Vortex. Since we're talking close range, that red dot makes sense, okay? If you want to be pinpoint accurate, then, yep, put a scope on it, no problem. As I showed you in my previous video, I had a Leopold scope I put on with all the subreticles, yeah? But for close range, red dot is good. I still sight this in at 150 feet. And if you look through a red dot at 150 feet, you say, oh, I need a scope. Well, actually, you really don't. Because intuitively, you still aim it. And then you're going to adjust, you know, your clicks to zero on your target until you're dead center. So even though visually you may not see the crosshair because you're looking at only a dot and it's so far down the dot is covering too much of the area on your target, you still intuitively zero it until that bullet's supposed to be where it is, and then every time you go to fire, you are intuitively lining it up and it works. You're still just as accurate. Because it's non-magnified, it's only 1x, you can keep both eyes open, and with both eyes open you can quickly acquisition your target, and you can be aware of peripheral vision at the same time, which you can't do with the scope. So the red dot is much quicker to acquisition your target and much quicker to keep an overall view of the theater you're operating in, and that's why red dot is great, okay? And the reason I like this Vortex, because most red dots don't have what I'm going to show you the Vortex does, okay? And that is the diopter adjustment here. You see that adjustment? Well, I got bad eyes, so I got to wear these glasses, yeah? Well, with the diopter adjustment, I can zero it without glasses so that it adjusts for me, yeah? And then the other reason I like the Vortex is your crosshairs or your dot. And this one's a dot with a circle around it, and the circle becomes my subreticle. Well, it's etched on the glass, so if my battery goes dead, I can still see and use the red dot. That's the problem with most red dots. Battery goes dead, you got no sighting device. With this particular Vortex, you can still sight it as etched. And of course, if you turn it on, and you can adjust how bright you want it. And it's great for low light and everything. It's great for quick acquisition because a red dot or green, whichever you prefer, it's going to be centered on your target, so it's much quicker. But if the battery goes dead, you're still good. You're still in the game, okay? Here we go. This is the valve we were talking about. Okay? If you start shooting with more power, you're going to be banging that valve a lot harder. Or if you just shoot a whole lot, even without more power, you're banging that valve takes a big beating. And that is the weak spot in the gun. This is a replacement valve. I don't want to have to wait for an order on the internet, which might be out of stock, right, to get a replacement valve. When you first get the gun, it might have a real slow leak, but as you break it in, this plastic kind of matches whatever molds itself to the seat in your valve, yeah? And then the gun will hold air for months without leaking at all. Now, the one that comes from the factory doesn't have this metal band. It's all plastic, right? So the metal band makes it so it doesn't break because you got that metal band reinforcing your plastic. So that's why I ordered it. I also ordered another replacement plastic, and I put the plastic one back in because with the metal band it affects the tuning because it makes it a little bit heavier. I like the feel of the plastic valve better, knowing that it could break, but knowing I'm also not pumping it clear up in the yellow, so I don't need that reinforcement. So order some O-rings and order a valve. And it doesn't matter whether you're buying this gun or some other brand, whatever it is, the valve is the weak spot. Always have O-rings and a valve on hand. Because post-apocalypse in a survival situation, you're not going to get parts. So have it ahead of time, okay? Now the other thing to tell you. Well, these are scope rings, yeah? But the same thing applies with the Red Dot too. In fact, my Red Dot on my full auto uses scope rings. And yeah, you can have a full auto because it's not a real firearm. Yeah, and you can have the sound suppressor and so forth. So as you see, one is a high mount, one is a low mount. So what happens is, the higher it is, it throws your point blank range farther out. The closer it is, your point blank range is far closer in. And by point blank range is your line of sight coming out of your optics, right? Is parallel to your barrel, right? But not truly parallel, because what you want to do is you adjust the optics looking down slightly to keep it, basically you're adjusting the barrel up slightly, so that when you fire the gun, eventually the pellet coming out the end rises to be in line with your optics, yeah? So if you zero this at 100 feet with the 30 caliber and with this height, it will match, the pellet will match the same out at 100 feet. Well, what it's doing is it's rising higher and then back down to 100 feet. So you're actually zeroed at two distances. You're zeroed at a near zero, which is going to be about 40 feet, and then the far zero, which is 100 feet. Okay? And then in the middle between it, say at 60 feet, your pellet's going to actually be high. It's above that line of sight, because remember, it's crossing over and then coming back down. The 30 is more loopy, yeah? So you got to know the math better or have a good app. So basically, what I have this set up is to be accurate in that middle between the two zeros. It's only a ½ inch high, okay? And a ½ inch with this height gives me out to 150 feet. So it depends, but because I want farther reach, I go with a higher. And of course, the advantage of bringing it down is if I'm only shooting 5 or 10 feet, now my bullet is low, right? Because it hasn't risen that far yet. And so I'm aiming for the dog here and I'm really hitting here because it's low. Yeah, you know, you can get red dots that have one dot, or you're going to have a series of 3 or 4 dots. So 3 or 4 subreticle dots, yeah? Or in this case, it's got a circle and you just know what the bottom of the circle is. And you can kind of use Kentucky wrenches between the two. And it's a tack driver. I want my bullets to, at 150 feet, each hole touches itself, yeah? Unfortunately, it's not exactly that case, but I'm within a 1-inch group by the time I shoot all 8 that the magazine holds. And 1 inch is great, yeah? And of course my group tightens up the closer it gets to me, but knowing that I'm a ½ inch off in the middle of my 2 zeros, right? So I hope that helps. You got an overview. You've learned how you can modify the gun, some just fun modifications. You know, by having the pump, I don't have to take my finger off the trigger, right? Even though it's a bolt action, the pump does it for me. It's great. Then I can do rapid firing, yeah. And with the red dot, it's rapid acquisition. You know, it's perfect. But you can put a scope on it too, no big deal. And of course you can modify this with different size tanks. So for example, if you know you're always going to have the silencer on it, then get a tank that's going to come on out here and hold a lot of air, where you can just magazine after magazine after magazine without having to stop and repump. Shoot all day because you got a lot of air. I can unscrew the silencer, fold the stock, goes in your backpack. This, you know, now using the app, what the app will do for you is once you put in the velocity that you're assigning after, you know, you're going to average 3 shots and it's going to give you your velocity, right? And you're going to put in your distances here. You're going to put in your grain weight, and you're going to have to put in the ballistic coefficient of your ammo, and that you'll have to look up on a chart from the factory. Luckily this one's printed right here on the tin. The ballistic coefficient of this one is 0.09. What the ballistic coefficient is how quickly, because of the skirt on the pellet, does that pellet lose energy downwind. So it may be firing at 930 feet per second, but how quickly does that speed start slowing down? That's your ballistic coefficient. A Strelok Pro, you can put in the particular optics you have. It will automatically then tell you for your optics, especially if you have a variable zoom scope, it really helps, as to what yardage on each one of them subreticles, which is really nice. And so if you're shooting out to 150 feet, you're just in the center crosshair, yeah. For most guns, 100 feet, but more powerful ones, 150 feet on a 30 caliber. But yeah, I might want to shoot out to 200 yards, right? And at 200 yards, I'm going to be in a subreticle way down here, but it's going to be in the scope, and it's going to tell me, okay? Or an alternative, I just turn the turret so many clicks, the app will tell me how many clicks to turn it. So anyway, there you have it. Goodbye.